There we go. All right. Today's presentation is a dune dialogue reflecting on 5 years of managing and monitoring the Cardiff Living Shoreline Project. Our speakers will explore lessons learned and key takeaways from the physical and biological performance of this innovative nature-based coastal resilience strategy. So let me introduce our 4 speakers. Bradley Nussbaum is the operations director at Nature-Collective, where he leads habitat restoration projects. He will be addressing biological performance today. Dr. Maria Winters is currently a postdoctoral researcher and NOAA affiliate to the Greater Farallon and Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuaries. Her research entails adapting the USGS shoreline model Cosmos to quantify the potential protective benefits of nature-based solutions at sites in the North Central California region. She'll be telling us all about the physical performance of the Cardiff project today. Todd Mura manages the coastal program at the city of Encinitas, which includes over 6 miles of coastline. The coastal program includes beach nourishment, shoreline protection, erosion control, recreational benefits, and habitat enhancements related projects. And his section of the presentation is operations and maintenance. And finally, Brian Leslie leads teams of engineers, scientists, architects, and environmental practitioners to deliver multifaceted coastal resilience projects at GHD, and has 20 years of experience as a coastal scientist, working both in the public and private sectors. He will lead us through overall takeaways and lessons learned for the project. So welcome, everybody, and I'll go ahead and pass it over.
Hey, Kellen, I think Maria is an attendee. Do you mind trying to promote her?
I'm on it.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, thanks, Kellen. Yeah, this is the team, and we're excited to share with you lessons learned from Cardiff. I can't believe it's been 5 years. And yeah, we got a little overzealous with our slide deck because we love this project. And we'll try to whip through things quickly. There's monitoring reports kind of galore on this project. So there's more places to get this information. Reach out to any of us direct to hear more about this project. But we'll try to get through this and leave enough time for some Q&A. Here is our agenda today. Go through the brief intro to the project. I'm sure everyone's heard at least one talk about Cardiff, the project, but we want to focus on lessons learned so that the next Cardiff can be born somewhere else, and we'll focus on that. So for a quick overview of the project, we're in the city of Encinitas, in the community of Cardiff by the Sea. This is a 1.5 mile stretch of shoreline between Seaside Reef and Cardiff Reef parking lot. It's owned by the city and California State Parks. Includes a number of layers of protection. It's basically a dune with a stabilized toe with reconfigured cobble with a backstop of a rock revetment. This buried rock revetment provides a last line defense should the nature-based system fail. So prior to this project, the city struggled with a stretch of roadway. Roadway closures were frequent. The roadway was undermined, which would lead to grout fills and bringing in rock, trying to shore this up on a kind of an emergency basis. This project's goal was to protect the roadway from flooding erosion for up to 2 feet of sea level rise. At the time when the project was being designed, that was through 2050, with the latest science that kicks us out to 2070, 2080, potentially. So good news. So that was the main project goal. The objectives of the project were to provide these different layers, as multiple benefit layers. The first one was to improve coastal access. Project improved access to and along the beach by providing 6 formalized beach access ways through the dunes, including this 88 access way on the far north end, this Moby mat you see. It also provided protected pedestrian bikeway and bike lane along the roadway to allow runners, cyclists, and pedestrians to traverse between the cities of Solana Beach and Encinitas. The project also preserved the existing parking lot with parking at the site with no loss of parking spaces. Another objective was to provide restored coastal dune habitat. This was a dune prior to the roadway, and we want to bring some of that back. So an objective was to bring 4 acres of rare and sensitive coastal dune habitat back to this reach. The Nature-Collective, local NGO represented by Bradley today, led a number of community and youth volunteer events to help reestablish these dunes through planting and seeding events. So this project has a built-in sediment management program, which is unique to the site. Much of the beach you see in this area was built out through a byproduct of a restoration of the San Alejo Lagoon project over the last 4 or so years. 330,000 cubic yards was brought out to this beach to widen the beach. The dunes were then built on the back beach. Those dunes are repaired, maintained through 10,000 cubic yards of sand that is brought up from the inlet lagoon to the dune toe, the foredune that repairs the sacrificial erosion zone of the dune as needed. So this sediment management program was built into the project and the program permits to maintain the dune over time. Longer term, the project built in this adaptive management plan or program. Essentially, we're still in phase 1, the maintenance phase of the project. The threshold where this stops making as much sense is where maintenance becomes too costly, the dunes are not meeting performance goals. That triggers the next step of the project or the plan, which is to adapt the dunes, widen the dunes, increase the height, think about things like the access ways, which represent vulnerabilities. Should those not be effective, the next step is to develop a long-term strategy, which looks at different options for the dune and the roadway, which take much more planning. I'm going to hand it off to Bradley now to talk about biological performance over the last 5 years.
Yes, and for the biological performance, we're going to cover in this section kind of how the vegetation did for the dunes, and then also one of our sensitive species, the western snowy plover, and how it's reacted to the dunes. So one of the first things we had to do since this project, since the dunes were utilizing dredged sand, was we actually had to do salinity leaching and wait for the salinity to reach the correct amount for us to be able to actually plant the dune species on there. The dredged sand comes in hypersaline from the San Alejo Inlet, and then we just kind of we did a couple of pilot projects beforehand with dredged sand, and we found in those pilot projects that it took about approximately 4 inches of rain and 4 to 6 months of just kind of weathering exposure for that salinity to leach down to what the native dune salinity should be. And this project, we'd actually there was 2 different dredging dates for the sand provided. The first one was in October 2018, and that sand was actually stockpiled on the beach where it started to leach. And then we were actually, once that part was constructed, we were able to actually plant that just 5 months later in March 2019. The second dredging occurred in April 2019. That was actually for the whole southern area. And most of that sand was actually placed directly into the living shoreline as is being constructed. Since it was kind of at the end of the rainy season and we needed that time for the salinity to leach out, we had to actually wait till the next fall to be able to plant that built dune section of the southern end. The planting consisted of a mix of seeding and container plants. Kind of the goal of the container plants was to really stabilize that back and the crest of the dune. And then we did seeding more on the crest, but then definitely on the foredune area. The foredune area only received seeding since the foredune is kind of more the sacrificial zone. We didn't want to, commit a whole effort of container planting to get vegetation established just for it to get, potentially destroyed in the winter storms. So the seeding was primarily in the foredune area, and all the planting and seeding efforts were done with volunteers. For the plant palette that we use, we utilized primarily 6 species. A couple of them were verbenas. We got like the beach sun cups out there. One of the more interesting ones for our mix was the beach fir. Not only was that one to help provide a vegetative cover like the other ones were, but the beach fir also helps keep people off of the dunes. You really don't want to walk on those barefoot. One of the difficulties for the site was irrigation. So we container planted these, but due to the linear nature of the project, it's about 3,000 foot long, and there's Highway 101 that backs along the whole backside. So our ability to irrigate was super limited. There was no water directly adjacent to the sites for hookups. And with the linear nature, it made it one very long restoration site. So to kind of overcome that, we ran just a single PVC line, a 2-inch PVC line right along the back of the dunes. And we put quick couplers about every couple hundred feet. And then we had it where a water truck could kind of charge that PVC line, and that allowed us to hand water as needed. Additionally, we tried to kind of time our plantings with the rainy season. That way we could, eliminate how much we had to irrigate, since irrigation was so difficult for the site. So when it came to the plants actually established really well. And this graph kind of shows we had 2 different reference sites that were kind of adjacent dunes areas in North County, San Diego. And you can see Cardiff Living Shoreline actually by year 2 was meeting the vegetation success in comparison to the 2 reference sites. Actually, year 2 surpassed both of them. And then year 3 and 4 here has kind of settled down based on how much seasonal rain we get, and is right in line with what we would expect for the dunes in North County, San Diego. Another way we looked at vegetation cover was looking at how the different topographic features of the dune is doing with the vegetation. We have kind of the fore dune, the crest, and the back dune. As you can see, the back dune has always kind of been the more highly vegetated one. That's partially our theory on that is probably partially due to the wind protection it receives, but also it seems to get a little bit extra rain runoff from how Highway 101 drains to that back dune area. The one thing to note is the fore dune is significantly lower. Part of that is because we just seeded it versus the container planting that the crest and the back dune received. But also you can see that 2023 there is no fore dune vegetation coverage. We had to rebuild the whole fore dune that year, so it's kind of been in a process. And then we also had to do it in 2024. So last couple of years, the fore dune vegetation has been really having to start from scratch all over again. Here's a couple just photos of how that vegetation is actually looking out there. The upper right photo shows the one for Sand Verbena, the Abronia maritima, and how it really provides that carpeting effect to help us get that high vegetation cover. The lower right one also shows that beach fir, which is that silver, kind of the silver greenish growing in its clumps. And then you can also see creates great flowering that the public really appreciates with the flowers that we see. So we have a federally threatened species, the western snowy plover, that roosts here during the winter. And so one of the things we were monitoring was how we had baseline monitoring from monthly bird counts, and then we also wanted to compare it to how well with the dune system, how is the plover adapting to this area. And so here's a graph of our monthly bird counts with the black line showing our 5-year baseline average versus versus each year of our monitoring afterwards. The one thing you'll notice is our numbers have started to decrease from December, January, February, and March. They've started to decrease in the last couple of years. And that's really been caused by the winter storm damage and the beach scarps that we've been getting. So one thing the project shown is how much of the western snowy plovers do not like beach scarps. This is the lower left photo shows actually that was 3 snowy plovers looking at about a 3-foot scarp, and that's actually sometimes a mild scarp. The scarps in some of the areas of the beach can sometimes reach 10 to 12 foot depending on the winter storm damage. and that day, 3 were on the beach, and the other 40 were actually in the reserve that day. And so when these winter scarps get formed, the snowy plovers really retreat back east across the highway into the Santa Lea Lagoon Ecological Reserve. And so the graph here shows how, you can see our baseline data, the black line, the plovers have not spent much time within the ecological reserve beforehand, but really in these last couple of years, the dark red and the orange, they're really starting to come in more during these winter storms when these scarps are formed on the beach. They retreat in because they prefer some of the habitat in there versus the scarp that they're facing on the beach. And even with the high vegetation success, we always have continuing vegetation maintenance. We do, especially during the rainy season, we do invasive species sweeps of the dunes. The primary one we have to deal with is the Cacao maritima, the sea rocket. That one's always coming in. Also along the access ways and along the parking area, we get a little bit more interesting exotic invasives that come in. Must be from like people's just feet and shoes that kind of jumps into the edge of those dune areas. We also, we're always also kind of continuously seed balking for dune seeds. That way, if we do lose that sacrificial zone in the winter storms, that next winter we have seeds ready to go to be able to reseed that foredune area again. And then for one of our sensitive plant species, the Acmepons frustratus, that's one that we've been working on targeting in expanding its habitat reach and its vegetation cover, since it's a sensitive species. And originally, it had a very slow start to the site. We had very low survivability of our initial container plantings, but just through some supplemental planting efforts and monitoring of it, it's actually really started to flourish on the site. One of the other questions, was as we were building this project, was how well the vegetation was going to help hold the dunes. And this is a really good photo. This photo is possible due to some of the winter scarps formed from the winter storms, but you can actually see the root structure that the verbena, and this is the Abronia maritima that it forms, that while we see only these top layer, this prostrate, low-growing dune plants, they actually do root super deep and with very thick roots to help hold that sand in place when the waves are hitting the dunes.
I think we're going to kick it over to Maria now.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me just okay?
Yep, sound good.
Great. So, hi everyone. My name is Maria. I was part of UCLA for the past 6 years as a PhD student, and I'll talk a little bit about the physical monitoring and the physical performance of this dune structure during its first 5 years of construction. So, please, next slide. So UCLA, technically we're the Coastal Flood Lab in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, run by Dr. Timu Galeen. We were in charge of monitoring not only the dune construction via UAS photogrammetric surveying, but we were also in charge of monitoring the dune change and the dune evolution over the last 5 years. So on the right are examples of 2 elevation data products or digital elevation models derived from the drone or the UAS system surveys. On top was the beach in November 2018 prior to construction of the dune. All that extra sand on the left, which is the north section, represents the nourishment that they had on site just before construction. And then below DEM is from May 2019, showing the final constructed dunes. You can clearly see the dune at the back of the beach in red with the access ways that cut through the northern section. And our resolution of the data is about 2 centimeters. So again, we can do not only some bulk volumetric changes and bulk elevation changes of the beach engine with time, we could also do some more high resolution overtopping modeling or hydrodynamic modeling, flood modeling. And in total, we collected, and I helped lead, almost 58 UAS surveys over the past 5 years, which is impressive. So these 58 surveys total with 5 large storm events captured. So, we were constantly monitoring the wave conditions online. We were watching Surfline nonstop. And if we saw a big storm coming through that we think was going to hit Cardiff hard, we prepared the day before and made it down there before the storm hit to capture the pre-storm beach and dune elevation, the during storm elevation and the post-storm. So, capturing not only this long-term data set, but these short-term duration extreme events are going to be crucial in calibrating dune erosion models, beach erosion models for structures just like this. And so the plot that we have here, kudos to Michael Angelis in the Coastal Flood Lab at UCLA for creating this plot, is showing a time series of the daily maximum total water levels on site at one location. And you can see every dashed line is a survey. You can see we have, yes, many surveys, especially during extreme storm events. So that's something we're really proud of, and it's going to be super critical in the next coming years. Okay, what does this dune kind of look like in terms of elevation? So this plot here is showing the elevation of the dune crest in red and the dune toe shown in blue along the length of the dune from north to south. And then we can see those 6 access ways that cut through, right? The elevation of the crest on the left here in sections 1A and 1B. And of course on the right, overall the dune crest ranges from about 5.5 to 6.5 meters nav D88. Whereas the dune toe, when it was, first completed, was around 4 meters nav D88. And so delineating that dune crest and dune toe elevation is important to evaluate, just how vulnerable was it to high water levels before and how vulnerable is it now? And you can see I've even marked there the prehistoric beach crest elevation in green. What did this beach look like? Sorry, Nick. Thanks. So here are some great aerial shots of what the dune looked like in October 2019, a couple months after construction. You can see in that southern portion of the project, the vegetation hadn't taken hold yet. You can see some of the wind fencing on the seaward side. And on the right, November 2023, after, 2023 in particular was a year of strong storm events in the winter. You can see, the beach had steepened, it had lowered significantly, and that shoreline had moved. So, the beach experienced lots of changes, but the dune overall had experienced minor changes, I would say, over the past 5 years. It wasn't until January 2023. Great, perfect. In January of 2023, we experienced the largest storm event that we've had over the past 5 years. Southern California experienced some of the largest waves it had seen in anecdotally about 20 years. And so on the left, you can see the overtopping and run up into the pedestrian access ways on the left, and on the right is some of the damage and some of the erosion the dune sustained. As you can see, those vegetation roots really hanging on, some of the riprap was exposed. Next slide, Nick. These are some photos that me and my lab mates at UCLA took on the day of January 6, 2023. That was the large storm event. Yes, it overwashed into the highway and into the pedestrian walkway. As you can see on those top photos, there was overwash of sediment, yes, across almost the entire length of the dune project. However, this resulted only really in 1 lane closure with minimal disruption to traffic and minimal closures of Highway 101. So that we considered that aspect a success. On the lower right, of course, just showing the significant dune toe erosion that occurred on the project. So yes, the dune experienced significant erosion with riprap exposure on that event. But for the most part, the dune remained in place. The dune crest remained in place. And this is just this is a figure showing a range of all the surveys, just a selection out of the 58 dune drone surveys that we have conducted over the past 5 years. So I just selected 3 cross-shore transects just to show from 2019 to 2023, the range of foreshore beach foreshore movement, the erosion of the dune toe, you can see in kind of the magenta pink colors that occurred in 2023. So again, rich data set that captured a wide array of events. Again, minimal dune change, except for that January 2023 event. And then overall, how has the dune changed over the past 5 years from a larger perspective? So here is a digital elevation map or an elevation map of the dune showing the changes from December 2019 to February 2024. So we can see there, at the most important part to take away from this is if you look at the dune, portion of the dune just up against the highway, overall there was minimal change that had occurred over the past 5 years, and most of the change occurred in the foreshore. Yes, here we can also see some long-term change at one profile in the northern section of the beach. Okay, looking forward, what are we going to do with all this amazing data? So the biggest one, we have some long-term dune behavior that we're still need to analyze. You know, how perhaps has the Cardiff dune impacted the shoreline movement? You know, how could it survive if multiple storms hit right after one after the other during an El Nino event or something like that? But most importantly, this data set will inform California dune modeling efforts. So as it stands today, we don't have a reliable dune model in the state of California to give us accurate predictions on how dunes or hybrid dune structures like this or living shorelines about how they will perform and how they will adapt to sea level rise and to changing beach conditions and changing wave conditions. So number one, this rich data set, not only taken from during construction, as you can see on the right, we captured all the inside riprap placement and all the inside cobble placement, but we also have erosion that occurred at all layers of the structure. So I'm currently testing some numerical models that can, you know, it can model some cobble and some riprap overtopping. And as well as I'm trying to develop a long-term decadal dune model in the state of California, which this data set will hopefully inform. And yeah, just to really showcase the amount of data, again, I really like to emphasize this. So this long-term 5 to 6 year data set, again, will be utilized to inform a long-term dune change model that will be incorporated into the U.S. Geological Survey's Cosmos model. And that's currently the postdoctoral work that I'm working on now. All right, and now I will pass it over to Todd to talk about operation and maintenance.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Todd Moran. I'm with the City of Encinitas, the coastal administrator there. We can probably, next slide. So the City of Encinitas, California State Parks, and the Nature Collective have a memorandum of understanding to operate and maintain the limits of the living shoreline. There's essentially 9 tasks that are managed by all 3 agencies. Typically in spring, the agencies will conduct an annual site assessment to determine the needs based on the damage that occurred over the winter months. The city owns the roadway, the bike lane, the trail, and parking areas on both sides of South Coast Highway 101 and maintains those regularly, as well as provides the trash and recycling service. State Parks owns the beach westward of the trail and maintains the fencing at the access ways, the dune, etc., and provides the lifeguard services for the beachgoers in this area. And Nature Collective, as previously discussed, maintains the vegetation along the dune limits, assists in the avian monitoring, and is the keeper of the permit to dredge the San Alejo Lagoon, allowing us to rebuild the dune with natural sediment. And as you can see from this picture taken this past winter, the dune provides a very effective barrier from king tides and storm surge that we typically see in the winter months. So in January and February, the king tides, which were approximately 7 feet in depth and 6 to 8 foot plus swells, took out almost most of the toe side edge of the dune system. A little over 1/3 of the dune was lost overall, which contained mainly sand and cobble. Some of the closer sections seaward saw about 50% removal or 30 feet of the 60-foot width of the project. And so kind of with each seasonal storm event, we have different maintenance needs covered by the MOU between the multiple agencies to basically maintain health and safety in this area. So trail maintenance and repair and roadway and parking maintenance occurs on a weekly basis. The City of Encinitas Public Works Division is out about 2 times a week, cleaning the bike lane there. You can see in the top left, which is the cycle track lane. You can see beyond left of that lane is the traffic lane with Sharrow. And to the right is the actual DG Trail. They basically power wash kind of that area, the bike lane, to keep the sand off of the actual cycle track lane. And then they have had to buy a special street sweeper, you can see here in the middle, that fits specifically within that lane. So it's, you know, half the size of a normal street sweeper, specifically for this purpose. Trail maintenance also can be done kind of typically on a weekly basis, depending on the seasons. So here you can see what we'll typically do is sandbag in anticipation of any major king tide events to minimize the tidal flow action through the access ways, as well as allow, you know, pedestrians to navigate kind of around them. As you can see, the top right photo, you can get around it and access the beach during low tides. And when it's obviously not passable or highly eroded, as you can see kind of that left bottom photo, then we have to just do a temporary closure until we can repair it. Typically in spring, once the city, state, nature collective have determined the overall scope or need, we dredge the inlet there at the San Elijo Lagoon near Cardiff Reef in the San Elijo campground. You kind of see the inlet passes underneath Coast Highway there, adjacent to the Cardiff Reef parking lot, and we use conventional construction methods to do that. The contracting team sets up their equipment in the Cardiff Reef parking lot. From there, they begin to dig out the sand that's accumulated in the inlet. They access it underneath Coast Highway. They begin to basically build a temporary roadway within the inlet, as you can kind of see in that central photo, to access more of the sand sediment near the railroad area. So it just depends on how much we anticipate removing as to kind of how far out they're going to go into that area. The large rock trucks are then filled with the sediment material and hauled over the living shoreline to begin the rebuilding process. The city and state and nature collective provide the safety and staff applicable to secure the limits of the repair. Shown here is the state lifeguards positioned to prevent walkers into the construction zone, as the rock truck there, kind of shown on the right, is delivering sediment to repair the dune toe. The past few years, we haven't been able to access around the restaurants there, the Chart House, Pacific Coast Grill, etc. So we've actually had to do traffic control plans to bring the rock trucks onto Coast Highway for that small portion of beach span, and then back onto the linear limits to repair it. So that does add substantial cost to the project. It's kind of an added step, but we've experienced that the last 2 years. The living shoreline span is 2,900 linear feet, so it's over a half mile. And consistent with our coastal development permit through the California Coastal Commission, we typically are placing about 10,000 cubic yards of sediment at the toe of the dune, burying any exposed revetment, as you can kind of see there in the central photo, and filling any erosion that's caused by either the street side sheet flowing that comes off Coast Highway. This shows kind of the overall width. You kind of see the existing planted condition. This is at the southerly end of the project site. And you can see the sand placement on the westerly side as before we start to kind of contour the dune. But that sand placement, we may have 2 piles, 3 piles, 4, depending on the eroded condition from that specific storm event. So once all the sediment has been placed along the reach, then we begin to contour the toe of the dune. The top left, you can kind of see where it's the existing condition versus the contoured. In the years past, we've used front loaders and excavators to do this. And this past year, we actually used a bulldozer to contour the entire reach, shown there in that bottom right photo. The bulldozer is far more effective in this capacity than the front loader, and it's kind of something we learned through the process of kind of time and just functionality. So you can see it kind of effortlessly climbs the dune and contours kind of all at the same time. So piles of sediment are placed on the westerly portions of the access ways. You can kind of see there in the central photo. That's to kind of cover things that have been eroded from the roadside edge. And then ultimately, typically an excavator or whatnot would fill in the pass. On the bottom right, you can kind of see the finalized improved condition. And then the excess material that is removed from the inlet is placed within the intertidal zone, consistent with our sand compatibility and opportunistic use program, or SCOOP, which basically the tide and the wave action will naturally feather the sediment into that area, which covers up a lot of that cobble that's in the intertidal area. And typically these piles will go away in about an hour's time. So here's what the final contoured condition looks like. It's a smooth contoured dune toe with a nice walkable, usable beach. It takes us about 2 weeks total to repair the entire reach. And then here's some additional photos just kind of showing the improved condition with the decorative fencing, the sand fencing, and then the Moby mat being in place kind of before the summer season starts. This concludes my portion. I will pass it back to Brian Leslie of GHD.
Great, thanks, Todd. And yeah, thanks everybody for all the comments. Keep them coming, and we'll keep answering them. Hope to leave time for verbal Q&A as well. But yeah, I want to talk about key takeaways and lessons learned, and this is going to speak to some of these questions that are coming up, especially around the cobble. We'll go through each of the different programs and the speakers that just spoke to those, and there's some sprinkled in lessons learned there, but then also speak to design changes. If we were to design this project today, how might we approach it differently, which I think a lot of the questions are speaking to. But overall, I want to start with a kind of overall take on the project, and you heard this from Maria. Overall, the project worked well in providing flood and erosion protection to the roadway. It withstood these back-to-back El Nino years, so pretty energetic years, and when comparing it to, just like anecdotally comparing it to adjacent sites, this is the Cardiff Reef parking lot and restaurant row that got really flooded during that January 6th event. You compare that to our site, quite a bit less. And then this year, Cardiff Reef parking lot had to do emergency rock revetment work to solve some of the undermining of the asphalt that you see there on the top right. So just comparatively, it's done quite well. And then just on the recovery, this picture compares January 6th to about a month later. And you'll just see how the dunes rebounded quite well. The vegetation withstood the impact of being overtopped. The roadway, I was out there during this and took this shot, but within an hour of this picture, the road was fully functional, and you would kind of never have known anything happened. So resilient project, it bounced back quickly from that impact. And now I'll quickly go through some of these lessons learned from the physical monitoring program. I talked to Maria, and from her present out just now, like the event scale stuff seemed tough to be out there during the right event. The event that was going to kind of make a mark out there, and then one that you wanted to capture, was difficult to time. And also commend Timu and Maria and team for making the effort to get down from LA to capture some of these events, which is a logistical kind of wrinkle. There's some there's difficulty in scrubbing the vegetation from the surface, this DSM to a DEM kind of conversion, and getting that 6 inches of vegetative cover out of the equation when comparing these surfaces to each other. Sounds like there's a workflow and process to improve upon that with maybe some RTK augmentation. Related to that is difficult to really track small elevation changes. We had a goal of understanding aeolian transport or windblown transport of sand within the dune, and it was difficult to really tease that out because it was so small, and especially when this small scale change is right up against a fence, it's difficult to tease out from a photogrammetric methodology. On the biological side, from Bradley, we learned some things about Western snowy plover behavior and not liking scarps, which is a good thing to know. Vegetation species success, which ones thrived out there, and others that seem to have difficulty getting established. Verbena and others seem to really do well. And then on the Verbena side, and to this picture, just the root structure and which roots seem to hold the subgrade well. and how those roots behave. It has been some interesting findings around that. So this is the time capsule kind of next few slides. If we were to design this project today, what we do different as far as cobble. The goal of the cobble berm was to protect the toe of the dunes. It ended up being a really small feature in the end, as I mentioned in the chat, about 3,000 cubic yards of about 30,000 cubic yards of sand. So a really small fraction of the overall percentage of the project. The cobble berm as built was not really at a scale to serve that function. It to really be effective at wave run up and overtopping dissipation, like the South Ponto State Beach cobble berm, you really need to scale something like that. It needs to be a really big feature. So the order of magnitude of this cobble berm was far too small to serve its intended function. And we don't really think much of it exists anymore out there. Like this picture, I think was 2023, and you kind of see like the remnants of it, but not much we think exists today. Access ways, really difficult features to manage as practitioners and coastal zone managers. Everybody wants good access to the beach. We want to maintain that, but those represent a vulnerability to the back shore. So these access ways serve as conduits for wave run up and overtopping back to the highway. We have 6 on our site, and this is during that January 6th event. Again, you kind of see the water kind of running up and through. We designed them to be oriented against the extreme event from a northwest swell they're like 45 degrees away from that to try to buffer some of that impact of wave run up through these access ways, but still they represent vulnerabilities. So if we were to, just a note to others considering these types of projects, to be thoughtful around access ways and to try to add as much elevation as you can to those. Within our next phase of this project, we might be considering having people rainbow up and over dunes where possible, so we can kind of close up some of these holes in our resilience or vulnerability. As far as construction methods, we learned a good deal there. Basically what we did with the buried rock revetment is we dug a trench, built a rock revetment, and then pushed the sand back over on top of the rock, which is a 2-ton rock nominally. And basically what happens when you do that is you introduce some air voids. We had the dozer run up and down the slope to try to vibe in sand into these void spaces, but we were not able to get them all. And what happened there is we got these micro, small scale sinkholes on top of basically the dune crest, or sorry, the rock revetment crest. These sinkholes started popping up like year 2 and I think peaked in year 3, and then they started to tail off and kind of self-heal themselves. So we had some huddles as a design team to try to understand what's happening with these features and how to resolve it and whether to intervene. And we ended up not intervening because they're not areas accessible to the public and they're repairing themselves relatively quickly. But so the means and methods of construction led to these features. There's could be a way to approach it differently that would result in these features not forming, but might be more expensive to construct. Finally, one of the key questions we had with this project in the design and also through permitting, and some of the questions being asked of it is, will it be self-sustaining in this location? And we're like, great question. We don't know the answer. So this concept or this diagram kind of represents what a natural system might look like in central Northern California, where you have a big dunes, a wide beach, say, that's eroding and accreting, and sand, windblown sand is blowing that sand back onto the dunes, and the dunes are growing and transgressing landward over time. So we really don't see that here at Cardiff. We don't see the self-repair nature of dunes. Windblown sediment transport anecdotally is really low, and we see that's just barely in the Maria's data. Like I said, this really small scale change, so we can't really tease it out. Loose sand, we're seeing kind of like on the leeward side of high features in the dune, like on the leeward side of these access ways or behind the dunes right before the fence, before the pedestrian trail. but we're not seeing this self-repair nature that we thought we might. So we envision the project will always require a helping hand, especially during energetic winters or successive energetic winters, which was the case. The project is fortunate enough to have this built-in sediment management program and the cooperation between this tri-party MOU that Todd mentioned. The project has been really positively received by the community. We have a number of monitoring reports that document all this. We want you to review those reports, and that concludes our presentation. We hope you enjoyed it and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love all the pictures. I'm a very visual learner, which is very helpful when you're talking about something like a dune system, to see all the things that have changed. I know you all have been working very hard answering questions in the chat. Please continue to ask questions, everyone, either in the chat or the Q&A box if you have some other lingering things. One I know that has not gone answered yet, because it was just asked. Do you think that pressure blasting sand into the large rock would have helped mitigate sinkholes from voids?
Yeah, that's the kind of the construction method that was alluding to. There's like, they call it like sluicing in the material, but if you're hydraulically placing sand on the beach, then the water is going to get into those void spaces better than kind of the dry placement over top of the rock.
Okay.
But that would have been for sure way more expensive, double if not more than that. So we opened it up to like any contractor could do the work that could do grading. And I think the value kind of represented that. Like it was a $2.5 million project, bid at $2 million, and we had like 10 bids. So if it was just a marine construction project, the bidding pool is smaller and would likely be more expensive.
An impressive amount of work for that amount of money, truly. Someone asked, are there any plans to extend the length of Cardiff Living Shoreline?
None that I know about, but I know that we mentioned the car-free parking lot has issues, and we're dealing with some of those. I don't know if anyone else can speak to that, Todd. I know you've been in conversations where it's been considered, but it's like space
it may
constraints,
be,
right?
it's basically a lot of it's state parks land, so they would have to kind of initiate the application through us. Most of the, like I said, the beach westerly of Coast Highway is all state parks, and so the city kind of maintains the roadway, the path, whatnot. So it just depends on how that would sync up. But could be potentially another joint effort in the future.
Yeah, with that that parking lot, the state of that parking lot, feels like if there is able to put a dune system over there, that could be a good idea. Okay, let me see another one. What is the projected sea level rise by 2100 for this area by IPCC? How might this impact the project?
My recollection, just rough numbers, is it's about 3 now. I think that's the, Nick, maybe you can help me here. But I think that's the high.
Yeah, I'd have to look up what IPCC differs from OPC's new guidance, but it's probably somewhere in that range.
And we have a lot of great questions about cobble. So here's another one. How did you come up with the amount, size, and location of cobbles for this dune system? And considering your lessons learned, what are your recommendations for future projects?
Yeah, so our design intent was always to use what was there and to reconfigure it on the dune, like the foredune, the dune toe. There was kind of a decision late in the game to minimize that. The sorting of cobble from sand was a potentially slow and costly procedure that we ended up kind of making a decision to just do the kind of not minimal amount, or it's like 3,000 cubic yards. So that feature got shrunk a little bit over time. And yeah, as I mentioned, if we really want that feature to serve the function we intended it to, it would need to be quite a bit bigger, way bigger. and that would cost more, and that might have a different feel, because there was the question of that people didn't want the beach to be nothing but cobble. There's pushback on that. So we're and then like on the city side, like they wanted the road had to be protected, so there had to be some backstop there to protect the road should the dunes not do their job. So anyways, there's a lot of like things we're experimenting with, and there was just some concessions like the cobble size volume being minimized, but so
And to add to Brian's, some of it was the visual aesthetics too, remember, through Coastal Commission. Maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, the visual thing was interesting, and I think there was a question about the overtopping of the dunes. We were kind of pinched between 3 different criteria. The city's engineers wanted the revetment crest height to be a certain elevation and no lower. The Coastal Commission was concerned about the height of the dunes impeding the visual corridor from the road to the ocean. So it had to be a certain height there. And then there had to be a certain thickness of sand so that the dune plants could establish. So we were just like working between these bounds, and it was definitely, it's not just coastal engineering kind of driving these decisions. It's a lot of, social and regulatory and political kind of conversations.
And kind of speaking to the social aspect of this, it was mentioned how much the community appreciates this project today. Was there community outreach conducted before the implementation of the project, and has there been any negative response from the dunes taking up backshore space?
There was engagement. I think I mentioned this at like my CAF talk recently, but it wouldn't be the engagement program today would be much different than it was then. Like it was less then than it would be today, but there was still targeted outreach, and we definitely heard that from the community. Is like, how much space are you going to occupy and how much cobble you bringing in? Because in our feasibility study, that was really the concept. It was like just how much sand versus how much cobble this thing would be, and it ended up being more sand than cobble, obviously. But the other option was like lots of cobble and not so much sand, just like a little bit of sand to dress over the top of it. So those were some of the conversations that took place, and the 60-foot width was very intentional and thoughtful with the community too, because I think out there before the project was constructed, the rock occupied like 40 feet of that. So we really only encroached an additional 20 feet into what was recreational beach.
And what would you say is the minimum beach width to develop a living shoreline? Thinking about how much space it takes up.
Not going to go on record saying anything there. But more is better, and it depends on the beach. So it's it's just this beach is relatively stable compared to others in San Diego. And we looked at some of the criteria coming out. I think there was Orange County or an LA study, I think, LA County beaches, that said like 100 to 150 foot beach width as being a minimum. I think that's, again, it's favorable to have more beach than less, and to have a nice stable beach or a consistent supply of sediment. I think you look at Huntington or some of those spots, Sunset, and that's a nice wide beach to work with. And especially on the wind-blown transport or alien transport of sand, I think that was a key finding that's not a finding yet, but our theory with the wind-blown transport is that you need that wide fetch of dry beach for wind to blow across to mobilize sediment to then deposit on a beach, where we never really have that with Cardiff. Like when we have an event that's windy enough to blow sand, there's a wave run up that's bringing, wetted sand, if not water, all the way up to, the dune toe. So there's nothing to mobilize sediment across.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm looking at the time and want to be respectful of the lunch hour if everyone's in California. Thank you again. This was such a great informative project presentation, and getting to hear so many different voices was such a pleasure too. I will send out a follow-up email to everybody with a link to the recording, so you can watch this again and again, so you can take it all in or share it with whoever you want to. And thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.